Welcome, heathens, pagans, and curious Christians to yet another episode of Pagan Haven, where learning builds communities. I'm your host, Ashra Dawn, and I'm so excited to bring back a surprise guest, which is our original co-host of this podcast, James Ferguson.
It's me.
Yes, I'm so excited to have him back. I said in my one podcast when he left us that he had some stuff he had to deal with. So we just kind of parted ways because this is my brand and he had things to deal with. He couldn't be on this podcast all the time, but with this massive podcast episode that I've been trying to get out to you guys, I was like, "Hey, do you want to help me?" And he had the time.
Surprisingly, yeah, I know, right? It was quite a nice invite to get.
I know.
Nice message to receive.
So sorry, I keep interrupting you.
Don't worry, it's all good. Nothing I'm not used to.
That you're not used to. Shut up. But anyways, he's not going to be permanently back. Maybe he'll jump in different podcasts whenever we have the time, and kind of see how it goes from there.
Look forward to future podcasts. It could be quite fun. Hopefully I have the time, but we'll see. Quite busy these days.
Yeah, that's completely understandable. But anyways, as we said before, that this podcast is the one that has been in the works for a really long time. Today's episode is the one called Loki and his role in Ragnarok. Now, this episode is kind of how my Loki's Legacy book came upon us. In the last podcast I posted, we read some of that and also explained Balder's death. If you have not seen that podcast or you don't know Balder's death, you probably want to listen about Balder's death before listening to this one, because we're going to talk about it in this episode, but we're not going to dive deep into it like we did in those other episodes. So yeah, this is going to be talking about the different mythos and the different deities that are going to be associated within Loki's family line and where Ragnarok is coming. And also, we're going to be adding in at the end of this podcast, the biggest asked question on our social medias is how modern day people build their altars for these deities and their relationships with them. So we're going to actually have people at the end of the podcast come on who actually associate with Hel. Or I'm going to talk to you about Fenrir because I've been associating with him lately. And we're going to kind of get into the modern day stuff that you guys have been asking for. So we're first going to get into Loki in general, Loki and his family line, because we're not going to be able to describe his children and all the other things that are associated with him until we actually talk about him himself. So Loki's considered a god he's considered Jotunn, who lives among the gods. His father was Farbauti and his mother was Laufey. Now, I want to apologize. Me and James both, we're not that great on pronunciations. So if we do mess up pronunciations, I do apologize. But we do try our best to be able to say these correctly.
I'm not gonna lie, probably not gonna try to pronounce them because they're just like, yeah, they're mad. They're mad at my ability.
Well, what I was also going to say is on our YouTube page, we actually put up the words that we're actually trying to say. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll be able to see what we're actually trying to say. Other than that, we're going to do our best to pronounce them for you guys here, wherever you're listening to us on the podcast. So Loki actually has two brothers, Helbendi and Bylslar, something. I'm very bad at pronouncing these, but he has two brothers who are not very known in Norse mythology. There's not much known about them. They're just always depicted as Loki's brothers. So before I start talking about Loki's wife and his mistress and his children, I kind of want to explain that I don't know if you know this, James. I know I've talked to you about this in the past, about polyamory, about where you have more than one partner.
I feel like I remember some of it. Not all of it, but some of it.
So mythology, Norse mythology, and most other paganistic mythologies, you see where they say, oh, this god cheated or this god. It's actually more common for polyamory. So Loki had a wife, which was named Sigyn. But Loki actually has a mistress named Angrboda, who is always seen as Loki is her mate. So polyamory is actually quite common in Norse mythology. It's just when it came to Christians writing the stories of Norse mythology into the book that we now have that, depict what we have, they obviously didn't like polyamory. They didn't like all that kind of stuff. So they wrote it in as mistresses and stuff. But Angrboda knew that Sigyn was Loki's wife, and it was still her mate.
That's mad, eh? We're just casually happily like that as God.
Yep. It just how their mythos worked. There's a lot that you'll see, like you'll see Odin has so many different children when it goes to so many different like women that he's been with, different goddesses, because in his marriage that he has with Frigg, he only actually has 2 children in that marriage, but he has more children like Thor, who is, Balder is his son when it comes to Frigg, but Thor, he was born from a giantess as well.
Damn, I did not know that.
There is a lot of mixture between Jotun, which are giants, and god blood. It's very common for them to mix among each other. And like I said before, Loki was actually seen as more of a Jotun than he was actually an Aesir, which is an Asgardian. So with Sigyn, he had 2 children, which were Narfi and Vali, which they do not talk much about those 2 children in mythos, just talking about how they are his children with his wife. Then we go on to Angrboda, which she has 3 children with Loki, and they are seen as these monstrous like creatures during Ragnarok that are just meant to bring the end of time. Fenrir is the oldest. Then there's Jormungandr the serpent, and Hel, which is now the goddess of death. But he also has another child, which not too many people know the story about his other child, which we're going to get into the story later in the podcast. But his one child, Sleipnir, is an 8-legged horse that is Odin's mount.
Wait, what? His child is his mount?
Yes, Loki's child is Odin's mount. So Sleipnir, which we will get into the story of how he came about, but when he was born, he was an 8-legged stallion. So Loki gifted it to Odin and said, just don't ask me how it happened. He's like, here, this is my child, take him. Just don't ask me how it happened. And we're going to get into that story later.
That's messed up. I'm not going to lie, that's messed up. That's messed up on some level.
Right?
He must have been on something.
Right.
I don't know what Loki was doing. I don't know if I want to know what Loki was doing, but I never knew that.
Oh, we'll get into it. Don't worry. So Loki himself, he was just known as a shapeshifter in many different stories. He could be seen as a salmon, which is one of the last things he was shapeshifted into before he was captured. He was seen as a mare, a fly, an old lady, even taking a shape of a Jotun later on, after Balder's death. Now, Loki is seen as the god, like the trickster god. But he's more of like a chaotic neutral. He never really did anything that was like bad or good. He only just did things that were what he wanted to do. He was, just a god of mischief. He just wanted to do whatever felt good to him. So sometimes he did help the gods, and sometimes he hurt the gods.
Just whatever he felt like doing, he'd do. Can I agree with him?
Exactly. In one of the stories of him helping was that one day Thor woke up and his Mjolnir was gone, his hammer. And he originally thought it was Loki. I mean, obviously Loki's the trickster god, so he's like, Loki, where's my hammer? Give it back. And he's like, I didn't take it. Well, they end up finding out that there was a Jotun, who really wanted to marry Freya. That was his goal. He just wanted to marry Freya. So he stole Thor's Mjolnir. And so when Loki was like, okay, this is who has it, I'm going to go talk to him, see if I could get it back. He goes, not dressed like anything else. He just goes as himself, Loki. And he stands before the giant and he goes like, what do you want for this, Mjolnir? The giant did not have good eyesight and mistook Loki, this, scraggly little god, for this Thor, the big, strong, big god. And he's telling Thor, which is actually Loki, if you want your Mjolnir back, I want to marry Freya. So Loki goes back to the gods and he's like, okay, so this is what's going on. And all the gods are meeting because they need to get Thor's hammer back. Thor's hammer is what protects them against their enemies. Like, Thor is their person who protects them, and he needs that hammer to do so.
Surely that's not right. I'm sure fucking he can use his powers naturally as well. He doesn't need the hammer, it's just a means of transport, so he has more effective use over it.
So, in Norse mythology, the Mjolnir is actually this very, very powerful weapon that was built by two dwarf brothers who were in this competition constructed by Loki. And yeah, they actually gave him the Mjolnir. So Thor, yes, he has his own powers to himself. So this Mjolnir is actually seen as this great weapon, and it's not just only Thor can hold it, it's only someone who's powerful enough to hold it. The Mjolnir itself just has so much power that if you touch it, it can destroy you. So it doesn't hold all of Thor's power, no. It has its own power, which combined with Thor makes him this unstoppable force that guards, the gods. So after he goes back and he's talking to Thor and the group of gods and saying, okay, this is what we have to do to get this Mjolnir back, Heimdall actually is the one who suggests, well, if he's not really good at seeing, why don't we just dress Thor like Freya? Because Freya outright refused. She's like, I'm not marrying this guy. So Heimdall's like, Thor, dress like Freya then. Go get your hammer back. And Thor didn't want to at first, but everyone ended up convincing him, so they dressed Thor up like Freya. Just dressed him up. Like, didn't even, shave his beard, nothing. He was just a hairy man in a wedding dress trying to look like Freya. And Loki used his shapeshifting to make himself look like a handmaiden of Freya, like a servant of Freya. So they go together and they go to, meet the giant who has the Mjolnir. And he's just like, oh, Freya, I'm just so happy to have you here. Would you like to see the Mjolnir, like Thor's Mjolnir? And Thor's so sick of being in this dress. He's so sick of being here and pretending. He's like, yes, let's see and he's like, yeah, let's see this Mjolnir. And the moment he gets it in his hands, he kills everyone there. He was just so angry. He's like, I'm done with this. And he goes back home.
Oh, fucking made him put a dress on, straight up. I'd be like, yeah, no, I'm smashing with a hammer now.
Right. But that's one of the ways that Loki actually did help the gods instead of hurting them. And there's a lot of different stories because, like I said, Loki's the reason that they have Mjolnir in the first place, but it was after he shaved Thor's wife's head. So he was doing it to save himself, really. But he's always on both sides, good and bad. But one of the bad stories, one of the worst stories that actually ended in Loki getting tied down. It all started with Baldur's death, which what I said earlier before, if you have not, if you don't know about Baldur's death or you have not saw the last podcast that I released with Baldur's death in it, you're probably going to want to go back and read about it because I'm just going to give you the cliff notes of that before we jump into the story of how he actually got caught.
Caught being naughty. Terrible.
Yes, basically. Baldur is the son of Odin and Frigg. He is the golden son. He is known as everything good in the world. He is light, he is pure, he's everything. He started having these dreams thinking that he was going to die, so his mother Frigg asked everything in the cosmos to swear an oath to not harm Baldur. And she missed one thing. Because she didn't think it was a big deal. She just didn't ask Mistletoe to, swear this oath. Or Loki found out that he was vulnerable to Mistletoe and tricked his brother Hodor into throwing a spear crafted of mistletoe, and it killed Baldur. Because he orchestrated it, no one actually knew it was Loki who killed Baldur. They didn't know what happened. And so they go to Hel and they're like, Hel, you have Baldur's soul, we want him back. And they're like, nope, you can't get him back unless you get everything in the world, in the cosmos, to weep for Baldur, for his soul. And if they do, you can have him back.
That's a lot of weeping, eh? That is a fair request for a soul.
Well, I mean, they go and they ask everything and everything starts weeping, but Loki disguised himself as a giantess, and refused to sweep for him. So Baldur stayed in Helheim. No one knew at that time that Loki was behind all of this. So now we're going to get into the story that they actually found that out. So as Igar, I might be saying that wrong. He is a Johnson who threw a party for the Asgardians. So he is actually the husband of Ran, who watches over all the lost souls that are at sea. So they have the whole party there. Thor could not attend from the beginning. He wasn't there, but his wife Sif was there, and Tyr and all these other people are there. Freya, Freyr, elves, everyone. It's a giant party. And Igar has two servants who are just like going through welcoming all the guests, and the guests just love his servants. They think they're just like so cool and so nice, and they're giving them all attention. Loki's jealous. Loki gets jealous that all these gods are paying more attention to servants than they are to him. So he kills one of them.
That's a bit evil.
That is evil. So the gods obviously were like, okay, you need to leave. Like, get the fuck out. Like, you just killed a servant. Like, there is no reason for you to be here. You need to leave.
Surely one of the gods could have resurrected the servant, though. Like, I'm not gonna lie.
Well, it's a bit iffy because, like, depending on where the soul goes, like, there's different afterlives to different souls and different deities that guard those souls. So depending on where it would go, you would have to go to that deity and try to, with Bowder go into Helheim. Like, Hel was in charge of his soul at that point. So it kind of all depended on where he went.
Well,
but anyway,
unlucky.
Yeah, really unlucky. But so then after he's cast out, Loki runs into the other servant and he threatens him and he says, "You need to tell me what the gods are saying about me right now. Like, what's going on?" And the servant's like, "You're not welcome here, dude. Like, go away. Like, no one wants you here." And Loki's like, "You know what? Fine. I'm going to act my revenge and I'm going to mix malice with their mead." So he goes back in to the feast. And right away, one of the gods is like, his name's Bragi. He's the god of poetry. He's like, "No, you're not allowed back in here. You just stay out. You're not allowed." So Loki goes right to Odin, and he says, "Odin, we are blood bonded. You have to have a drink with me. Like, you can't cast me out. Like, I'm calling in my favor. I need to sit and drink with you guys." So Odin looks at his son, Vadir, and says, "Well, make space for the father's wolf, or the wolf's father." That's how he says it. He's like, "Make space for the wolf's father," which, like, obviously
twice that's got you out there.
I know, twice in a row it got me. But yeah,
Loki's not as silly as he looks. He's quite a smart man. He remembers quite a bit.
Exactly. Yeah, Loki's very, very smart, and that's how he gets like through most of these situations and gets out of the situations that he gets himself into. However, this is a situation he does not get himself out of. So like after they all pour drinks, Loki decides to make a toast. So he raises his glass and he toasts to every god and specifically excludes Bragi. So in return, he's like, "Okay, Loki, I don't want to sit here and argue with you. I don't want to cause any issues. Like, how about I just give you basically all my worldly possessions? Will that appease you? Like, if I give you all my worldly possessions right now, will you just shut up and, like, just stop?" Well, Loki wanted a fight. He didn't want to be appeased. Like, he was specifically in this hall to cause problems. So he's like, "No. I don't want anything from you. You're already, like, you don't go to war. You're a big baby." You're basically calling him a pussy, being like, "I don't want anything from you." So all these gods, yeah. And all these gods start chiming in, and they're, like, battering Loki. And Loki's coming back at them with, like, all these insults. And he's literally just insulting, burning the bridge as he's standing. Like, basically what's going on.
I relate to him so much. So much. I love it. I love Loki.
Well, then Thor walks in the door. Thor finally shows up and he is not happy because he is hearing what's going on, and Thor threatens him 4 times. And on his last threat, and he's like, I will knock your head off with my hammer if you do not leave right now. And Thor thought he was, or Loki thought he was being cheeky, and he, as he's leaving, he brings up that he's the one who killed Balder. Not in the moment, he didn't realize that's what he was basically saying, but he blurts out that he is the cause of Balder's death. So then he has everyone angry at him. He is like being hunted at this point. So he transforms himself into a salmon and goes into a stream and tries to live out his life as a salmon. That's not going to fool Odin.
Of all things.
Right. Well, that's not going to fool Odin. Odin is the father of, like, you know, all the gods. He knows everything. Like, so he finds him, he captures him, and he chains him down with Balder's entrails and puts a snake serpent over him and allows it to drip venom into his eyes for all eternity until Ragnarok would release him.
Well, that's one hell of an eternity. Venom to the eye. Oh, Jesus.
Right? But his wife, being as loyal as she is, she actually sits there with a bowl over his head collecting the venom. However, every time she has to empty the bowl, she has to walk away from him and empty the bowl, so every once in a while he still gets venom in his face, and he's sitting there cursing her and calling her all these names as he's dealing with all this. But yeah, like, he's meant to be there until Ragnarok releases him. So that's kind of like just like a quick outlook at Loki. I'm going to give all the backgrounds of these gods, and then we're going to get into specifically how, like, modern day people deal with them at the end of this podcast. So we're going to jump into first talking about the story of Sleipnir, how the 8-legged horse became a thing.
Oh, God. But I'm not gonna lie, this is not my favourite part of this. I'm not curious at all how the 8-legged thing became to be.
So, long ago in the history of the gods, there is Asgard and there is Vanaheim. Vanaheim is home to, like, Freya, and, well, was home to Freya and her father and her brother, and, like, all of, like, the sorcery type. Like, they were known to be the most beautiful and the most, like, into witchcraft and prophecy. And then you had the Asgardians. They were in Asgard, they were Odin and all these other ones, but they had, you know, the king of the deities and all that stuff. They go to war because Odin believes he's the king of them. They don't believe that. They are going to war. By the end of the war, Asgard's pretty much destroyed. So they're like, well, we're defenseless right now. We need to build a wall to protect us while we rebuild Asgard. And this strange traveler comes to them and goes, I can build you guys a wall very quickly, within a year. And the only thing I want in payment is, again, Freya as my wife.
Damn, he's really chasing after her. Gotta admire the dedication here. Like,
this is a different god.
Oh.
This is a different person.
Damn.
Here's the thing. Freya is the goddess of beauty and the goddess of, like, sex and stuff like that. So many people lusted after her. So they're like, yeah, that's what I want in payment. And Freya's like, no, I'm not going. Like, obviously. And so Loki's like, guys, there's no way this dude could build what we want him to build in a year. So how about we just tell him if he cannot finish it in a year, then he doesn't get paid. Like, and then we have a wall built already. We just have to finish it at that point. So they're like, okay, whatever. So they go and tell him, and the stranger actually agrees to it and starts building. He has this massive stallion that's, like, helping him build this wall. So he's getting it done very quickly. And the gods are all looking at each other going, he's getting this done really quickly. Like, he's definitely going to get it done within a year. We're screwed. And Loki's like, no, I got this. Don't worry about it. I have a plan. So Loki goes and transforms himself into a mare, and he seduces the stallion.
Oh, wow.
Pulls him away from the stranger who's building the wall. So the stranger's without a stallion. He can't finish the wall, and he runs out of time. And the stallion and Loki are still missing. So, like, as the Asgards are dealing with the stranger who's like, you guys cheated. You took my stallion. Like, this is ridiculous. and shows himself to be not just like a god or any simple thing, but he's a Johnson, he's a giant, so he reveals himself as a giant, so Loki, or Thor, bashes his head in with the hammer. So that guy's gone. He's dealt
Thor
with.
just likes to kill things, doesn't he? He's quite brute.
Oh yeah, Thor is very warlike. He just, like, that's what he does. He smashes in giants' heads. That's his main goal in life, is to smash in giants' heads.
As long as he's happy.
As long as he's happy. So
No, I'm not going to say
later, later Loki comes back with this fool that is 8-legged, just, comes back with it, and he hands it to Odin, and he goes, "Don't speak of it.
We dirty.
Like, you can have it, just don't speak of it."
We dirty, man.
Yes. So that's like the story of how Sleipnir became Sleipnir. Odin was the mother of Sleipnir. He transformed into a female horse and seduced the male stallion. But that's Sleipnir. So we're going to get into the story of the three monstrous trio that is the bringer of Ragnarok and what this whole thing comes down to. So Angerbolda, who is a giantess, who is her name means the bringer of grief. She is technically kind of the father, and Loki's the mother of the monstrous trio that they have.
Loki's the mother?
It is said. Well, it's said that the flesh of Angerbolda's heart fertilized Loki so that he could become impregnated with the monsters that he gave birth to. That's just like a story. Who knows if it's true, but
I hope not.
It's told that Loki's actually the mother and not the father of his three, like, monstrous children. But so he has these children, which are Fenrir, who is the giant wolf. You have Jormungandr, which is the giant serpent, and Hel, who is portrayed as like a half-dead kind of Johnson. They are left with Angerbolda. Like, Loki leaves them with her to, so she can raise them. And Odin finds out about it. So Odin's like, we can't have this. Like, they are monsters, like, of Loki. Like, we need to have custody of them. We need to go get them. So he goes and gets them. He kills Angerbolda, which I think he kills her a total of 3 times. Or some of the gods, like, in the history of Angerbolda, she gets killed multiple times by these gods, which is just for her.
Yeah, very for her. 3 times. That's it. Quite curious to how she keeps regenerating.
Yeah, it just always says that she's able to get out of it, like she's able to, like, escape, the death or something.
Seems Loki's on her side.
But so, like, Odin gets a hold of these, children, because they're children at the time. They're still young. Fenrir being the oldest, he was just a puppy, and they're like, okay, well, we can keep him here. Like, we'll just keep an eye on him. He's here. Picks up Jormungandr, who's the giant snake, and he's like, ugh, no. And he just throws him into the sea of Earth, Midgard. And then he sees Hel. And he notices Hel isn't one, like, Johnson are known to be the destroyer of things. And she's a Johnson who has half of her appearance as dead flesh and half of her appearance as, like, normal flesh. And she's just comfortable being around the dead. She just wants to be around the dead souls that are there, and Odin's like, you know what, let's just put her in Helheim, she'll rule the underworld. That is what ends up, like, this is right at the beginning, this is what happens when he gets a hold of them. So we're going to talk about Fenrir first. Fenrir is now in Asgard. He is a puppy in Asgard. And Tyr seemed to be the one who wanted to be around Fenrir the most. He seemed to bond with Tyr. Tyr is Odin's son. He is the god of, like, lawmaking and justice, and he's portrayed to only have one hand, and it's because of Fenrir. So Fenrir, who is this tiny wolf at a time, is just living his life in Asgard, but they're starting to realize he's growing very quickly and he's getting big. So the gods are like, oh god, like, what is going on
The
here?
gods are like, oh god.
Yeah. Oh, us. But so they're like, we need to do something about this. And then a prophecy is brought forth in front of Odin, and it says that Fenrir is the death of Odin. That Fenrir will be the one to kill Odin. So they're like, yeah, we need to do something about this right now. So they start playing a game with him. They're like, oh, let's see if you can break out of these chains. You're such a big, strong wolf. So they would throw chains on him and he'd break out of them. And being a puppy, he's like, okay, let's play. So he's playing. Well, they keep getting increasingly stronger, and the wolf is starting to get a little bit worried because at one point, one of the chains was pretty strong and he struggled to get out of it, and the gods seemed a little too happy about that. He ended up breaking out of it, but right then and there, Fenrir's like, there's something going on. So the gods are like, okay, we need to find something to chain him down. They go to the dwarves, and the dwarves are like, oh, if you give us these 6 ingredients, we will make this chain that's just unbreakable. When they hand back the chain to them, it looks like a ribbon. It's really thin, like, it doesn't look like it's strong at all. And they take it to Fenrir, and they're like, okay, try this then. Well, obviously Fenrir is looking at it going, yeah, I'm not doing that. And the gods are like, come on! Like, you say you're so big and bad. Like, come on. They're egging him on the entire time. So Fenrir is like, fine, I'll do it, but one of you has to put your hand in my mouth. Because if I don't get out, I'm eating your hand. And so obviously all the gods are like looking at each other like, I'm not doing that. Like, no one wants to lose their hand.
Don't blame him. I would not be volunteering to lose a hand either. The wolf could probably just take you from there.
Well, Tyr ends up volunteering, and he's like, you know, I'll bite the bullet. I'll do it. Like, he was friends with Fenrir by this point. He was the only one who was brave enough to feed him or spend any kind of time with him. So he's like, you know what, friend? I will stick my hand in your mouth. They put the chain on him. He cannot get out. And he's tied down, and he starts to realize that's exactly what happened, that he was betrayed by the gods. So he bites off Tyr's hand and eats it as he was told. Now, it's still said that even though he is chained down to this day, or until Ragnarok happens, like that's when he'll be freed during Ragnarok, but it's said that Tyr still visits him and still feeds him and tries to, I guess, apologize for betraying him. So their friendship is still there. Jormungandr is the second child of Angrboda and Loki. He is the giant serpent. So, as we said, he was cast into the Sea of Midgard right when Odin got his hands on him because he was just disgusted with him. He's like, nope, don't want this, threw him down. He was like, man can deal with this. So, maybe that's where the Loch Ness Monster comes from.
I don't think so. Like, Ness is nice, man. Ness is nice, man.
Okay.
Definitely not a giant serpent trying to kill people. Don't see why people keep calling Nessie evil. You sound as, mate. Just swimming the boot.
Well, so there's actually a story that, like, there's a hatred between Jormungandr and Thor because Jormungandr, he kept growing and growing and growing until the fact that his whole body rounded our sea to the point that he could bite down on his own tail. So, like, he is huge. And so Thor, before the party where, like, you know, Loki gave up that he killed Balder and he, you know, was hunted down after he insulted everyone. Before then, Thor was trying to get ready for this party, and he was trying to borrow a, like, giant, like, bowl for ale or stuff for the, you know, the host. And when he went to go borrow it, they were on Midgard asking to borrow this, and so they went fishing to get food for dinner that night, and Thor actually catches Jormungandr. Like, he snags Jormungandr, and they end up, like, trying to fight each other, but, oh my goodness, I cannot remember which god was with him at the moment of this happening, but that god was like, dude, like, don't touch him, like, leave him alone, and, like, pulls him away from it, like, please don't. So, like, he leaves him alone, but it's like a feud that goes between them that Jormungandr and Thor just hate each other.
Well, it's unfortunate, but Thor probably won the fight.
Well, in the end, they both end up dying.
Well, that's shite luck.
Right? But before we talk
That's
about
just
the end,
unfortunate.
we have one more goddess to talk about, which is Hel herself.
Oh, I thought it was
Hel.
me. Damn it.
Yeah, sorry. We'll talk about your goddessness in another podcast.
Meant.
Okay, sounds good. So Hel is the youngest of her siblings. She is always portrayed as like a half flesh, like and half decaying. And it's kind of to symbolize that she walks easily between the two worlds, between the dead and the living. She was always seen as like the least of the monstrous of the three of her siblings because like she didn't show the aggression. She didn't show like that she was like mean or evil, and she was actually known to be very patient. When she was thrown from Asgard by Odin, she ended up taking over her own domain called Helheim. Her bed was called the sick bed. Her knife was like portrayed as famine, and her home was mainly named after unpleasant storms. But it was always described as like a warm place of celebration. And Bowder, now that his soul is in Helheim, is always depicted sitting in a high place behind Hel. Like he is made a guest in Helheim. He's not there as a prisoner. Like, yes, his soul's trapped there, but he's dead. So that's his afterlife. But she makes it as comfortable for him as possible. Hel is actually also described in other mythologies and other texts as well. It is seen that King Hadden was being led in his afterlife by a mysterious woman, and the journey ended at this gate where this woman threw a beheaded rooster over the wall, and then after it hit the ground, you could hear it crowing on the other side, which was supposed to be symbolizing that there was a like life even in death. Like you are reborn in this afterlife.
Why chicken of all things? Why behead a rooster to prove a point?
I'm honestly not sure. That's just how the story goes. If anyone listening knows, please leave it in the comments because I would be interested in understanding why it's a beheaded rooster that they chose.
Just out of sheer curiosity, I was just keen if you knew.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious too. I don't actually know. But the woman that was like leading him, it's described that she was Hel herself that was like leading him to his new afterlife, like peacefully, trying to show him that like, yes, you're dead, but there is life here. So she's always kind of shown as this peaceful, patient type of goddess of the afterlife. And actually, in an old English gospel, she's actually seen coinciding with Satan in Christian hell. She actually doesn't take kindly to him like being in her dwelling and actually demands him to leave her. Like she just doesn't want to be a part of him, and she was never seen as evil. She was only seen as the goddess of death.
It's very interesting. Never knew she had anything to do with Diablo himself.
Yeah, she's depicted in Christian, early Christian mythology in the early writings, and like I said, she's depicted everywhere because she's just known as the goddess of death. But she was not the only goddess of death. There's actually, beyond, there's so many different mythologies, so obviously there's so many different kinds of goddesses or gods of death. Thinking of like Hades in like Greek, and you think of like Satan himself in Christianity. But in Norse mythology, Ran, who is the wife of the Jotunn who threw the party where, you know, Loki insulted everyone, she is the goddess of the sea, and the people who die at sea, she watches over them. And Freya is actually also considered to be a goddess of death, and she watches over the people that enter her hall. The people that normally go to Helheim, because one of the biggest things that people always ask is like, well, how do you know what afterlife you're going to go to? Each god and goddess kind of look for specific people to come into their hall, but Hel was just kind of the person who looked over the people who just died, the people who died of sickness or of old age. Like the people who just died, they would go to her and she would watch over them.
So she was just like a neutral.
Basically. And I mean, even in the story with Bowder and his death, it shows her power because when Odin was like, I want my son back, Hel kept him at bay. The king of the gods could not get his son out of Hel's realm. And that's how much power she actually had.
That's mad, eh? That's quite a bit of power. She has to be right up there next to Odin for strength-wise or something.
Exactly.
What do they call it?
Empower, like, you know, yeah, energies and powers and stuff, yeah. But that's just like, brief outline of these gods so that we can actually get into the bulk of this, which is talking about Ragnarok and how they are actually associated in Ragnarok. Before we start talking about Ragnarok, in my Loki's Legacy book that I've talked about in my other podcasts, I actually write into the story talking about Ragnarok, obviously, because that's what the book is trying to prevent, like the whole story of it. So I'm going to read just like a little bit of what I wrote in the book to describe Ragnarok, and then we're going to go on from there and actually go, what are the other steps that happen? So it begins on Midgard, where man will experience 3 straight winters of war. It's the winter of all winters that will follow, bringing bitter frosts and biting winds. Midgard would fall into 3 seasons of winter, with no summers between them. Mankind would become so desperate for food and other necessities that all law and morals will fade, leaving only survival. It is said that brother will slay brother, father will slay son, and son will slay father. The wolves Skull and Hattie, who have been hunting the sun and moon since the beginning of time, will finally catch their prey. The stars will disappear, leaving a black void in the heavens. Yggdrasil, which is the tree of life, would tremble, and all the trees and mountains would fall to the ground. The chains that would have held Fenrir would snap, and Jormungandr will rise from the depths, filling the sea over the earth as he made his way to land. Now that's just like depicting like what you'll start seeing on Earth, on Midgard, before the war of Ragnarok would even happen. It is said that after Ragnarok begins, after it starts, all these beginning things that happen on Earth, Fenrir is released, Jormungandr is released, and Loki is released by the trembling of Yggdrasil. They will go to Muspelheim, which is the land of fire, and join the Jotuns to take on the battle of Ragnarok. Now, the Asgards know Ragnarok's coming. They saw the signs, they know it's exactly coming, and they're like, we can hide behind this wall that we had built by another Jotun, or we can go and fight. They go and fight. They decide to find common ground for their battle on Midgard, on Earth. The gods will go to battle on Earth.
Earth just gets used as a playing ground, doesn't it?
Basically. So during Ragnarok, while they're all fighting this out, a lot of the gods die. Fenrir, who is mad at Odin for, betraying him and doing everything that he does, swallows Odin whole. Like, they end up in a battle and Fenrir just swallows Odin. So Odin's son, Vidir, kills him. Some say that he stabbed him in the heart, some texts, and some texts will say that he actually tore his jaw open.
I wish I tore the jaw one. Get revenge for your dad. What a slap.
Right. So Fenrir and Odin are dead. Himdall and Loki actually face off, where Loki ends up dying, and Himdall is mortally wounded. Or not mortally, he doesn't end up dying, but he is very, very, very wounded. Freyr, he's in critical condition.
Right, there you go. So, no, it's better than very, very, very wounded.
Yeah, there you go. So Freyr, who is the twin brother of Freya, goes to war goes to fight the Jotun Surtur. Surtur is the head of Muspelheim. He's the one who's bringing the fire to Earth. Like, he's the one who's bringing the world-devouring fire. Freyr and Surtur end up killing each other before he can make it to Midgard. So Freyr actually saves the Earth from just devouring in fire. Thor and Jormungandr face off. The giant serpent and Thor face off against each other, and Thor kills the snake. However, when Thor strikes Jormungandr spews his venom all over Thor as he's dying, and all over Midgard, which, kills Thor and really just pollutes all of Midgard. Garm, who is the guard dog of Hel in Helheim, faces off against Tyr, and they end up killing each other. Freya, seeing all of this destruction, she gets on Sleipnir. Odin's already dead now, so Sleipnir has no longer an owner. Freya jumps on Sleipnir, takes the rest of the gods, and heads back to the Bifrost to get back into Asgard. They try to, retreat. Midgard's falling to pieces. um, what happens is it says the remaining of the world will just sink into the sea, and that there will be nothing left but just a void.
Just blanket over it like it never happened.
Exactly. And after these events, this is where a lot of people believe that Christianity actually came from. I'm not saying that's exactly what it is, but there's theories that this is where it came from, because obviously Norse mythology is older than Christianity. So, like, yeah. So we're gonna get into this. It says after these events, the world will rise again, cleansed and fertile. The surviving gods will return to Asgard, and there will be 2 human survivors left. Balder, which was the god of light, purity, and everything good in the world, will return to Asgard, now being freed from Helheim, and takes his place as the king of the gods, his father's place. So it's said that after Earth is destroyed, it is reborn because of the gods rebuilding it, basically, and Balder is now the new king of gods, who is the god of light, purity, and everything good. So I talked to you guys about the deities that are associated with Ragnarok, how Loki's children are involved in it. But like at the beginning of the podcast, I explained to you guys that I want to be able to show you guys the relationship that we have with them modern day. What we use for their altars, how our relationships are with them, just how the gods and goddesses are that we actually associate on a day-to-day basis. And starting out here, we're going to talk about Fenrir and Hel. And with me, I have my friend Scott, who actually follows the goddess Hel.
Hi, I'm Scott. Yes, as Astrid mentioned, Hel is my matron.
Yeah, and I have recently started following Fenrir. I've had him kind of hanging around me for like a year or 2 now, but I kind of gave in to him and was like, okay, you're my deity as well. So him and Freyr are kind of like chilling out together. But one thing I always talk to people about that they don't actually understand is that Hel and Fenrir are actually very patient gods.
Yes, Hel is very misunderstood. A lot of people is just associated with death when it's more than that. She is a caretaker of the dead. Those are her quote unquote people. She watches over them, make sure that they're taken care of. She's a very kind, very compassionate. She can be cold, but not cold in the sense of rude, but just cold as, I don't know. It's hard to explain how she comes across it.
Yeah, and like it's also explained like in the history of her that like people always try to just kind of keep her at arm's length. Like they respect her and they see her, but they keep her at arm's length, and it's kind of basically like it's a 2-way street because she does the same thing. She's, the goddess of death, and she's more comfortable with that side is death.
Yes, she is. For my personal workings with her, she is very reserved as far as who she works with, what she does. Like even in this, the things that I do with her, she doesn't want me talking about everything that I do with her, even in this podcast. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and people don't realize that we actually have like personal relationships with our gods, because like Fenrir, he's one of the people that he chooses you, just like how like they're very picky about who they choose, but if they choose you, they're sticking around you whether you like it or not, type of thing. They're like, yep, that's my human, I'm going to follow them.
Oh, very much so. It took me a while. Hel's claimed me as her son. She's my spiritual mother, hence her being my matron. But it took me a while to realize that it was Hel, because for the longest time I thought Thor was my main deity.
Yeah,
and
I remember that.
Hel
for like
was,
a good year.
Yeah, Hel slowly made her appearance, and then because of Hel, somebody else had been brought into my path, and that person helped me realize that hey, Hel's been knocking on your door and she's around. Once I got over my fear of Hel and finally got in there and was like, okay, all right, I'll work with you. She just came in full force. There was no tiptoeing in. It was boom, I'm here.
Right. And that's one thing people don't understand about pagan gods in general, because it's not just Norse. Pagan gods in general are just very, very vocal type of deities. Unlike when you see like Christianity and stuff like that, it's more of like a silent faith where in paganism, you are dealing with those gods. They are in your face and you can't get rid of them.
No. And obviously with Hel, I would never want to get rid of her. She actually, because I'm an EMT, so she helps a lot in my day to day. One of my very first calls when I was training in as an EMT, unfortunately, it was a person that passed away. So for me, this is my first time seeing death in real life and seeing it right there, seeing the body laying there. So Hel really came in on that day of comforting me and knowing that, hey, this is something you're gonna have to see. Given the career field you're in,
Right.
This is something you're gonna have to see. You're dealing with, but I'm here and I'm not going anywhere.
Right. Yeah. I really feel like she chose you because of your ambition of being an EMT, because you are going to be dealing with death a lot. And I think that's why she chose to stay around you so often, because you're going to be there to help guide them to her.
And that's the thing is, especially because with the part that I do of transporting patients, I transport a lot of elderly patients, a lot of people that might be, in their last stages of life. So it's a weird feeling of being able to walk into like a hospice or care facility, assisted living facility, and it's just that feeling of knowing these people are in their last stages. So when I get that feeling in my gut, and even if it's not my patient and it's just somebody that I happen to walk by in that assisted living facility or whatever, I will ask Hel to help guide them on their final stage, whether or not that's their religion or not. I'm just asking, my matron to go, hey, can you guide them to wherever their final journey is?
Right. So also people want to know about like whenever we go to make altars for our specific deities. Now, I have an altar that is a mix between Freya and Fenrir. So I'll just explain what's on my altar. I actually have 2 statues, one of Freya and one for Fenrir. On that, I actually have rabbit pelt that kind of goes over the table. I kind of see it as more of an offering to Fenrir than to Freya, but I mean, it kind of does go into her fertility and stuff like that with the rabbit pelt as well. For Freya, I tried to do the pretty stuff like roses and like rose petals and like shiny gems and stuff like that. For Fenrir, I have like a hunting knife that's painted with a wolf's landscape on it. I've also got more like earthy stuff like bark and like bird feathers and stuff like that, because he's more of like a creature of nature and, more the rugged type of thing. And it's a combination of the both. Now, all deities can't share altars. Surprisingly, Freya and Fenrir actually work very well together. I didn't expect it, but they do. But you always want to kind of go with what your deity feel like, what you're getting from your deity, because they will tell you if they don't like something that you put on their altar. They're very open about that.
Yes, they are. For the longest time, I had Hel sharing, because for a while I didn't have much for her than just so I started with basically just a small figurine of Hel that I got from a local metaphysical shop down here, and I just put it on the altar that I had her sharing with Aaron Bridget. Eventually got to the point where as Hel was making her presence more known and I was realizing, oh, she's my main deity, she wants her own altar. So I ended up clearing space and gave her my own. I have an altar cloth. It's a you could almost look at it as it's sun and moon. It kind of looks like the Morgan's triple goddess symbol, but I got it to represent Hel's duality of life and death. And sitting on the center of it is a very beautiful hand carved statue, where it says her name on the front at the base in the runes. It's got Garm on one side. She's holding her ritual knife in one hand. She's sitting on a throne, and it's got the beauty of her split her face of life and death, skull and actual face. Same with the figurine. And then she's holding a little offering bowl. But as you look on each side, and on the back of the throne and everything, it depicts like, I can't tell if it's a sacrifice or what exactly. I have to look more into it detail. But it depicts, like an offering to hell. So then with that, I've got 3 candles, 2 of the tall tower candles
Yes,
that
I
are in
have
the
2 of
jar.
those as well.
Yeah, and I've got Hell's Bind Rune drawn on it in Sharpie. And then I have a candle holder that I will, get the regular just stick candles, and I'll carve her name and carve her bind rune into it, and then I'll put it in the candle holder. I also found out that while working with Hell, I'm attracted to moths, and that's because they're also a lot representation of death, especially go figure the name Death Head Hawkmoth. I have a taxidermy Death Head Hawkmoth that sits on her altar. I have 2 skulls that are carved out of wood. I have a witch's wreath above her, hangs on the wall above her altar. I have a skeleton hand candle holder. It's a fake skeleton hand that I got from at Halloween.
Hey, whatever
But
works,
so-
works, because as long as they like it,
Yeah, a lot of her stuff is obviously skull or death related, given her path. She loves having coffee with me, so I got this patch, and it looks like a tarot card, and it says the coffee,
Mhm.
and it's an image, and it's got books. It's got a stack of books with a skull next to it, and a coffee cup with like a smoke, like a black cloud coming out of it, with the moon coming, with the moon and the cloud. But also on top of her altar, she holds. So she claimed three of my tarot oracle decks. 2 of them sit on the altar, along with at least one of the books that I have for her, and then my grimoire journal that was made for her. So it's cramped, but it's also clean at the same time.
Right.
So, and it's dedicated just to her. Nothing else gets placed on that altar except her stuff.
Yep.
And one of the very first pieces I got for her that I wear every single day, I got it from Etsy, and the piece is called Heart of Hell, and it's a solid black turlamine piece that is carved into a heart wrapped with copper.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, because I was looking for stuff for her as I started building her an altar, and that caught my eye, and I could just feel her going, buy that first, wear it every day, do not take it off unless you're at home.
Right.
And even now I'm wearing it right now. Like, I rarely ever take it off unless I'm sleeping.
Right. Yeah, I have a Fenrir pendant on my altar, but I wear basically just a broad pagan type of symbol as a pendant to just kind of, not worship, but give tribute to all the gods in paganism, just because I try to teach, broad variety of paganism. I'm trying to be respectful of all, but I have my altar to the 2 that I do follow.
Right. Yeah, no, like I said, I had to finally just dedicate her own altar. I was like, oh, okay.
Right. Well, the goddess Brigid, she's the triple goddess of Celtic paganism, and
yeah,
she's
she
a
can
very
be.
powerful goddess as well. So I could see why you would have to separate the 2 altars between Hel and Brigid, because they are both very powerful goddesses.
Yeah. And it's funny, when I did have them sharing, they had no problem with it. And
Oh, really?
I work also with a Valkyrie. I work with the healing goddess Valkyrie Air. Air and Hel get along amazingly well.
Uh-huh.
And it's because, again, they both deal in the life and death.
Right.
You've got a Valkyrie that is a healing Valkyrie, but she also deals with death too. You've got a goddess of death and life too.
Right, yin and yang right there. That's paganism in general, though. If you think about it, paganism in general is just all about balance of energies.
It is. It really is. There's one other thing I have on Hell's altar. It is I got into making healing jars and everything, or spell jars. And with, I guess, a little bit of guidance for the person I made it for, but more so just based on my own intuition, I made a healing jar for the person, and I topped it with melted candle wax from one of Hell's candles. So that sits next to Hell's statue because Hell guards that one closely. In return, said person made me a healing jar, and guess where that sits? On Hell's altar, that at their place. So I'm like,
Right.
okay. So yeah, no, it's been an experience working with Hell. She's gifted me with a few things. There's stories and legends to her that on her skeleton side of her face, the blank socket isn't really blank. It's filled by fire, and the legend behind it is that it's you can't lie to Hell. You cannot escape death.
Right.
Everybody's going to eventually, meet their death, but you also can't lie to her. She will, she'll see it through her fire. You can't lie to death. So I've gained some of that ability of, I already knew if somebody's vibes are off, I already know. Like, if you're trying to lie to me, I know you're going to try. I know you're lying to me. And I'm like, excuse you,
Right.
Don't try.
That's also part of being an empath, which both of us are.
That gets tiring sometimes.
Yes, very much so.
And then just as much as death moves very silently and quietly, I do as well. There actually has been physical change that Hell has done. Like, I move a lot quieter, and I'm not a small guy, as you know.
Right.
And I'm like, how is this happening? And I just go, you know what? I'm just gonna go with it. Hell is very good for shadow work. If you are dealing with grief, anger, pain, anything like that, you can offer to Hell. I won't say thrives on it, but she does accept that quite often. She accepts that as a gift because that's something she has to deal with down there. That's something that she has to deal with in her realm, is anger, is anguish, is, grief. Well, like I said before, she's very comforting. She's very...
Well, she's used to being that guide, for the people who are newly dead. She doesn't want to scare them or anything. She wants to peacefully guide them to her realm.
And she can come across as scary. I've seen the angry side of her. And that is it is not your typical anger. It is a very cold, a very quiet, seething anger.
Yeah, I think of both the kids, because Fenrir is the same way. I feel like both of them got that from Loki. Like, that is a Loki trait that both of them have gotten. Hell, Jormungandr probably even has it too.
Yeah, and to sit there and not be the target of her anger, but to see it, right. I was like, right, never pissing mom off then.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what because we always say that you can sit there and talk to your gods any single way you want. You can yell at them for all you want. Most of the time they'll joke with you back, but you do not want to actually piss off your gods.
Don't ever disrespect them. I flat out, I don't even work, I barely work with Thor anymore, and I had to move his altar. I had to move him to share a space with Sif and Bridget because Air wanted her own altar finally too, so I would forget it out. But the whole time I was doing it, Thor was bitching about it. I finally just told him, Thor, shut up and quit whining about it, or you're going back in the box, or you're going back into your box.
See, Thor is a very, he's a jokey god. People don't understand that. And I always say that Thor and Loki are actually very, very similar in personalities. It's just they have different allegiances. Thor's allegiance is to Odin and the gods, but Loki's is to himself. His allegiance is to himself.
Loki's do my
yeah.
thing.
So Thor, you can joke with Thor. It's he's one of those guys that you can literally it's thunderstorming and you're like, F you, Thor, why do you gotta do this? And he'll just be a smart ass back to you. He takes it very well.
Oh, very much so. But like I said, he was whining and complaining over the fact that I was making him share an altar, and I said, dude, shut up and accept it or you're going back in your box. Yeah, he didn't like that too much. I didn't care.
Yeah, it happens though.
It's fun with Hell because I was searching for an Oracle deck for Air, and like I said, Hell's claimed 3 of my Tarot Oracle decks, and she still wants more. But I was looking for one specifically for air, and I kept looking and I kept finding, and every so often I'd hear Hell go, "I want that one. I want that one." I said, "Mom, you have enough. I'm looking for air. I will get you another one later, but you have enough right now." And she's like, "All right, fine. I still want one."
Right. She's like, but just don't forget me. Like, I'm still here.
I was like, "Mom, I'm not gonna forget you. You just gotta be patient." And again, she is. She's very patient.
Me and Scott actually have a mutual friend of ours named AP, and her son actually has, like, Loki is following your son around, isn't he?
Yes, and my child is very chaotic, but it's beautiful.
So I'm sure their energies kind of coincide with each other.
Yes, and started picking up relatively early on that Loki was in the house. And with Loki, you do have to set some boundaries because he will be a little bit wide open and be very much right there. He tends to be more present a lot of times than a lot of other deities because he will be all up in your business.
Right. Well, I mean, even when I was talking with Scott, we had said, like, with like Thor and Loki, because they're very similar, because they kind of have the same type of personalities. It's just their loyalties are different, because Thor's loyalty is to the gods and to, like, his father, where Loki's loyalty is just to himself. He does things that he wants to do, type of thing. So he's just very chaotic.
Yes, but he is very much a lover of children and tending to those with trauma. And kind of those that are the outsiders or considered the outsiders or the problem children, those that are looked down upon in society, those are the children that he very much gravitates to.
I mean, he's an outcast himself, so that would make sense that he would want to, be around the people he's like.
Very much so. And tends to be tender-hearted to those with trauma, and he wants to help coach them through how to deal with it.
Right. So what is it like dealing with him in, like, your household and just, having him around so often?
Be prepared for spiders. He loves his spiders. I have told him that we need an agreement. He can keep the spiders in the bathroom. The spiders can stay in the bathroom, but they need to stay up on the walls and the ceilings. I don't want them on the floor. And because I told him, like, if you put them on the floor, people that come in will step on them. So Keep your babies up out of reach. And even when I have exterminators come in, I'm like, leave the spiders. Leave them alone. We have an agreement. So those stay there, but my house stays a chaotic mess the vast majority of the time. And at this point, I'm like, this is what we live in now. We live in chaos, whether it's toys or crafts or something strung out in all areas of the house. It is a mess, and you're always craving sweets. So that's not healthy for any type of diet. And I already have Hermes that enjoys his pastries. So that doesn't help either.
How does Loki deal with, like, the other gods that are around you? Because you have Hermes, and who else do you have?
I have Hermes, Aphrodite, Hecate. Freya does pop in every now and then. She's also taken a very strong liking to the same toddler that Loki has also claimed. So I have them that come around, and of course I have Merlin. And Loki just loves to be a pest. He will, if you're doing, like, work with him, he will knowingly interrupt you to ask for something random. And he will pester you until he gets it.
Definitely sounds like him.
So he knows not to do it, but he will do it just to be a pest. And that's where you kind of have to sometimes set boundaries of, hey, I'm trying to do this right now. I will be sure to get you this and maybe another little extra something if you let me finish with what I'm doing right now.
Right. Well, even in Norse mythology, it shows that he is like a very jealous type of person. Like he likes the attention to be on him. So when it's not on him, he does what he can to get it on him. And that's what causes a lot of issues in some of these Norse stories.
Yes, because which even other followers have said he is believed to be like the center of Norse myth because he puts himself at the center because he wants to be that center of attention.
Right. And I mean, this whole podcast episode has been about Loki, his family, and how it even brought around the story of Ragnarok. But like the story of Ragnarok starts way before Ragnarok even happens. And it's all because of Loki, too. Because it's from him killing Balder and it's from him starting trouble at a party and all these events that lead to it. All these things have Loki in it.
Yes. Loki is, he's the god of chaos, god of mischief, and god of fire. And he is a very chaotic, mischievous type of trickster. He enjoys playing pranks. He tends to take them too far.
Mm-hmm.
But working with his followers, he still will sometimes play pranks, but he has to be careful because he understands that the mortals aren't like his siblings or the other gods.
Right.
And because he is very, very protective of his children. If somebody is hurting his children, it's like a switch flips, and you don't get that playful, funny, sweet side of him. You unleash this other side of him and he will go off. And I think that's why a lot of people also feel safe with him. They know that he has this silly side of him. And I say silly lightly, but
I feel like all the gods really do have a sillier side to them, but Loki is very more open with his because like most of the gods are like, okay, we're gods, like we can't like constantly be goofing off, and Loki's just like, nope, I'm here to have fun.
Basically literally it. And you can tell when he enters the room, the other gods are like, it's like that heavy sigh. Now,
Right.
like my other deity, Sinji, that is a Reiki guide, he's perfectly content with Loki. Like, he loves his energy. He thinks he's entertaining. He's all about him being in the house because it livens things up. Because Sinji's one of those that you never know if he's going to show up to you dressed or not.
Right.
And you're like, can you please put on pants? And Sinji's just like, now why would I do that? Other people can't see me. And Loki just encourages his antics, so they mesh well together.
Right.
Now when the other guides come around, they're like, please make him stop.
Can you deal with him, please?
I'm like, this is us dealing with him, sir. I'm sorry.
If we try to stop it, it's just gonna get worse. You just kind of have to let it ride out.
Just let it ride out. It'll eventually be back to somewhat normal. I mean, he's mostly here because of Joseph, and I have to learn a few things to prepare Joseph when he gets older. I'm sorry.
Right. That's definitely crazy though to have like the gods be so interested in such a young age. And like I feel like that always ends up happening because I feel like the gods actually shape us into the destinies that we're supposed to get into, because even when we were talking to Scott, Hel is the goddess of death. He always wanted to be an EMT, so of course that's where like his life was going to go, and the deity that chose him. So I really believe like that really does shape us. They've been with us since the beginning.
Oh yes. And I know a lot of people tend to be kind of like, I don't think I have a guide. I don't think anyone's ever been interested in me or been with me. How do you even get involved? And a lot of people don't realize they have had a type of deity with them since they were children that's been watching them and helping them mold. And they just don't realize it or see it yet.
Right, and it can always be multiple. Sometimes
Mhm.
it's not just one, and sometimes it's not just one the entire time. You can have them come in and out of your life.
Oh, yeah. Like my oldest, he has two distinctive guides, Poseidon and Apollo. Vastly different from Joseph, who has Loki and Freya.
Hmm.
But it's more so a little bit more Loki right now. Freya is definitely here and around him, especially when it comes to his gigantic love for animals and saying that none of the animals in the house are ours, they're all his. We just get to pet them, apparently, and take care of them.
Oh, that's funny.
They're
You
all
got a
his.
little animal empath on you.
Yes, it's adorable.
But anyways, is there anything else that you would like to let people know about like Loki, dealing with him, or any like helpful hints for it?
Yes, like I have a list of things that I can name off. So Loki's actually the element of fire. And that's part of his title of being the god of mischief, chaos, and fire. So it makes sense that his element is fire, because if you're starting to kind of like really resonate with fire, along with seeing other signs of having interest in things that you may have not found interesting before, like spiders, you see snake skin and you're like, oh, I'm going to collect this for some reason and I don't know why. That's probably due to Loki.
Mhm.
Because his symbols are snakes and spiders. And the animals that are kind of like relatable to him, and reptiles, amphibians, whatever, is snakes, wolf, foxes, spiders.
I know the fox is mainly for his wife, Segan.
Yes.
Sigan. I always do an E instead of an I. It's Sigan. But his
Well,
wife, Sigan, she's more associated with the foxes than Loki is, isn't it?
yes, and I think a lot why it's only kind of relatable to him is technically kind of how not Poseidon, Hades and Persephone, they like having something of their spouse, their partner that they care about being part of them. Like
Right.
something to represent and respect them also while you're respecting them.
Right.
And if you're going to have an altar for him, he enjoys having cinnamon, lavender, yew, or juniper on his altar. He enjoys the colors of greens, reds, blacks, silver.
I always just think of Loki as a Slytherin.
It makes sense. Snake is his symbol, so one of his symbols. The crystal for him, that at least I know for now, is jaspers. He enjoys different types of jaspers because there are so many jaspers. Like, there's hundreds of different types of jaspers. So they always look and are different. And that kind of coincides with him because he is a shapeshifter.
Mm-hmm.
And each person that worships him or works with him, he may present himself as being different or look different to each person just for entertainment. For offerings, he, of course, sweets, loves sweets, alcohol. I don't encourage drinking it just in case, although I drink it, but he enjoys alcohol, snake skin, like I had mentioned earlier. If you're like randomly picking up snake skin and you don't know why you're wanting to pocket it and take it home, it's because he wants it on his altar.
Right.
Jewelry,
And
he
people
likes
don't
tiny things.
a lot of time people don't realize that like gods like just kind of speak into your unconsciousness. So like you feel
Yeah.
like you like have an urge to do something or something like that, and it's like, well, that is the god talking to you. There's so many different ways that gods can talk to you, and one of them is just instinctual inside you.
Yes, a lot of people don't realize that. So if you're always having like this weird, oh, I need to get this for some odd reason. I don't know why yet, but I'm sure there will be another reason or sign showing me why, but I'm going to go ahead and get it.
Right.
There's also toys. He likes cute little silly knickknacks. He actually, ironically, does like the representation of him of Loki from the Marvel movie because he likes how Tom Hiddleston looks.
How would I have known that? Like, I knew that the one thing of all the Marvel stuff would be Loki actually agrees with the way his character is portrayed. Like, not that he's Thor's brother or anything else, not like the historical things, but he likes the way Loki's portrayed in Marvel.
Which, I mean, I like the way Loki's portrayed in Marvel, so...
Right? I
we
mean,
agree.
it's similar.
Yes. And so he actually enjoys, like, if you want to even gift him those little action figurines, he will enjoy those. Or just, the little posters or whatever. And another thing, which nobody probably would even think about, Loki enjoys or loves when you donate to children's centers, like St. Jude's or anything else that involves children and helping them and donating what you can. He actually likes that. Out of all the chaos and crazy stuff he does, his first thing is taking care of children.
Even throughout doing this podcast, I have really come to think of Loki in a different light. Like, I always knew that Loki and his family were misunderstood, but especially going through the stories. Like, he's the reason that Thor has his Mjolnir. And yeah, it was because it started with a prank of him shaving Thor's wife's head, but it ended up getting him the Mjolnir, which was the thing that saved the gods more often than not because of Thor wielding it. He is ultimately good in like his intentions. It's just sometimes his executions turn out bad.
Yes, I mean, just like when he went about turning himself into a stag, a horse. I said a stag. A horse to save Freya by tricking that other horse to go off with it.
Yep. We actually did that. We talked about that earlier in this podcast, and James, the co-host, he was just like, I don't even want to know what Loki did. He is just dirty. He's like, I don't want to know.
But I mean, he did what none of the other gods would have thought about doing to save Freya from not having to marry this guy that she didn't want to be with.
Right.
So he did what the other gods wouldn't do and stepped up to the plate and was like, I'm going to take one for the team. And he went and did the dirty just to save Freya.
Right.
And
I mean, he's a good guy. He at heart, he's a good guy. He makes bad decisions. That's what he does. He's very impulsive, and that's what it is. He's ultimately like he's nice. He's a kind. Okay, so someone actually on TikTok corrected me on this, and I actually very much like, and I said I was going to use it, so I'm going to use it now. There's a difference between nice and kind. Being nice is you drive by someone who has a flat tire and you're like, oh, I'm so sorry, I wish I could help you, oh my goodness, and you sit there and talk, but you don't actually help. A kind person might show up and like they might be like, oh, you're so stupid, I can't believe you did it, just let me do it, and they actually change your tire for you. That's the difference between being nice and being kind, is in words and actions. And yeah, like Loki, he's kind at heart. Like he may not be nice, but he's kind at heart.
exactly. He goes about doing things in some of the most awkward, weird, off-putting things, but he means well a lot of times. At least 97% out of the time.
Right.
the other percentage is just let me, unleash whatever I'm doing.
His impulsiveness blowing up in his face.
Yes.
That's exactly what it is.
Yes. And he really is. He's great to actually have around. Would it be nice if he could get my child to be on board with cleaning up his mess after he makes it? No. No, it's not ever going to happen. But yes, it would be great if he would. But then again, Loki also isn't good at cleaning up his mess either.
Right.
So it's interesting having him around and working with him from the angle that I've worked with him, the amount that I've been doing it. It's not been full on heavy like it is with my other guides. But then again, Loki also isn't exactly my guide. At least not yet. I have a feeling it'll eventually happen, and I might end up... I don't know what's going to happen to me at that point. I might go crazy. Who knows?
Oh, I felt the same way with Fenrir because I've dealt with many deities in my times because of me being the guide that I am to help people find their guides, basically being the introduction person. So I've dealt with so many different gods, but Fenrir just kept coming back to me. And like at first I thought he just kept coming around because like people I'm associating with or whatever, but like after a while, like he was just still here and I was like, well, I guess I should set up an altar for you too, huh, bud?
Yeah. Because it's kind of how it started out being a little bit with Hecate, because Hecate works with Merlin.
Mm-hmm.
And so she would kind of be around because of him. And then she continued to linger more and more. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting.
Right.
Looks like I need to set up a place. And another thing with Loki, shadow work. The thing that so many people want to avoid doing, shadow work.
Mm-hmm. It's all of his family because me and Scott were just talking about with Hel and Fenrir. Shadow work is very big when it comes to Loki and his family tree in general.
Yes, they want you to come to terms with your trauma and childhood, everything that makes you a little bit uncomfortable to come to terms with. He's all about doing shadow work. I'm really bad about staying consistent with shadow work. I will admit that as a witch, I am really bad at that. And it's a good trait to have, but I'm really bad at it.
Yeah, unfortunately, Fenrir forced me into that, and now that you're saying it, I'm realizing why Fenrir has been around because I've had this huge shift in my life. And not only was it a huge betrayal by someone I thought was my friend, which is a very, close story with, Fenrir and Tyr. But not only that, but I had to come to terms with some of the fake people in my life. And I think that's why Fenrir really did stick around with me because he's like, listen, like you're gonna be betrayed. Like you are gonna be dealing with a huge life altering thing. And like, you're gonna have to go through it and you're gonna have to deal with it because there's no way to avoid it. You have to just face it.
Exactly. And it's kind of like they do give you sporadic of warnings beforehand because it's like they know that something's going to happen and they want you to be prepared for it. And we have to do our part to prepare ourselves. I know that I'm just really bad. Like my ADD brain, I know I'm supposed to be doing this, but at the same time, I'm pure chaos on, oh, I forgot to do something today. What did I forget to do today? And then that comes about and I'm like, oh, I am a really bad student.
Right. I feel that.
I'm like, why do you guys work with me and put up with me? I'm really bad at all of this. I'm always forgetting that there's something else that I need to do, but here I am, and none of you say anything during the day. It's like you're just waiting for that aha moment to hit me.
Right. Well, so we don't make this podcast go into 2 hours here. I am gonna say that is our portion with just learning about the gods and deities in general of modern day. I want to thank Scott and I want to thank AP. AP's so awesome. I very much anticipate her coming back to help out with other podcasts, especially because the next one we're going to be voting for, which I'm going to explain more at the end of this podcast, is you guys are going to vote. So like if they pick witchcraft, I mean, I'm trying to do a history and modern day witchcraft. Me and AP can sit down and do a podcast together to be able to really talk about that if that's what you guys want.
Oh, that would be absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, so we'll definitely plan for that later. But yeah, that is what it's like to deal with modern day deities. So basically, that is the story of Loki, his family tree, how they get into Ragnarok, and how we have our relationships with them modern day. Before I go and before you guys all get off and stop listening to me, I do want to talk about a couple things. First off, I want you guys to vote for the next episode. I'm going to be putting up a voting thing on Astrid's Army website that you can check out, that you get to pick if you want the next episode to talk about witchcraft, if you want it to talk about Satanism, Celtic, or Egyptian, because those are 3 topics I would like to get into next. I want to see what you guys want to hear, especially the Satanism one. I want to be able to explain it to people because a lot of people have a misconception of Satanism. It's not what most people think it is, and I would like to actually explain what it is.
Nowhere near as evil as people think it is.
It definitely is not. So I definitely want to be able to get into that. But I'm going to let you guys vote. You can go on to astridsarmor.com to be able to vote for that next podcast. I want to try to get away from Norse mythology because that's what we've been talking about since we started the podcast, but I want to start branching into other things now that we finished this episode. And speaking of Astrid's Army, definitely check out our website. It's always being updated because we try to keep you guys updated on what's going on with Astrid's Army as a whole and Pagan Haven as like a podcast. Plus, we have our store on there where we have our new basic witch boxes now for sale. There's going to be a lot of new things coming. Our artists are currently working on a pagan calendar where you guys can actually get like a full like year-to-year calendar, and instead of you seeing like Christmas and stuff like on this calendar, you're going to see Yule and you're going to see Samhain and you're going to see all the pagan holidays that all of us celebrate. We are also looking for musicians right now because the people who originally did our intro outro, we are no longer associating with that band, so we want to look for a new intro outro. So if you guys are interested, you can always shoot me an email at astridthepagan@gmail.com. I can get you over our application for looking into doing that, or you could just find out all the information on astridsarmy.com. We also have 3 new books coming out. Well, 3 new books in the works. One, we're working on the Loki's Legacy, which there are previews for it everywhere on my page. We did a little bit of a reading of it with the last podcast, a little bit in this one. But I'm very excited about that one because I'm allowed to write poetically, and it's my favorite type of writing. I'm also working on a group book called our D&D book, which it's me and my D&D group working, giving us backstories. We're just kind of putting in a bunch of our D&D writings into one book that people can just like read if they would like. On top of that, Astrid's Odyssey will be coming back next year. So anyone who is from TikTok, who listens to this podcast, who originally started following me because of my Astrid's Odyssey book, we are redoing the first book. Because of the fact that we've lost a lot of our members in our group, and the members that stayed, we got even closer, and we have so much that we want to like redo with this book. So we are actually going to be starting the process in October. We're thinking of doing a big Samhain festival on TikTok for the redoing of Astrid's Odyssey, which I'm super excited about. The last thing we're going to talk about real quick before we send you off is our Discord. Going into our Discord, we have a brand new section called No Crying Alone. We set this up not as in a professional help type of thing. I want to make that very clear that none of us are professional therapists or anything, that we can't give professional advice, but what we have is we have a role set up that if you sign up for this role, you can tag our buddy system. And if you're feeling down, if you're feeling like you just need someone to listen, like you need someone to listen to you, like you need to vent, you need to yell, you need to scream, you need to do something, and you just need someone. Sometimes it's better to do it with a stranger or whatever. You can tag that buddy system, and whoever is online and able to actually be able to communicate with you will be able to like either DM you privately, or we have a group vent session that you could go into a group and everyone can, you know, just vent it out. And it's kind of set up a little bit like Snapchat where you can't read the history of messages. So once you type it and you leave that, you know, page, it's gone. You're not going to be able to see it again. So it's just a vent session that anyone could sign up for. You'll find it in our Discord section. Just adventure around. But again, I want to thank you guys so much for sticking with me. I understand with like my surgery, my recovery, everything, that this episode was such delayed, and I do apologize for that, but I was able to give you guys a more in-depth and more structured podcast by delaying it, and not only that, having James come back and help me out with this one.
Woo, surprise.
Woo, surprise. But
Big surprises.
yeah, so thank you guys so much for being here. Maybe we'll see James again on another podcast.
Hopefully so. Hopefully so. We'll see what Bossman says about it. See what you say about it.
Well, I mean, yeah, you never know. But until then, just keep building, keep learning as a community, and we will see you next time here on Pagan Haven.
Right. Thank you very much for having me again. It was great time. Great fun. Great time.